Good evening, everyone. My name is Sameer Hinduja. I'm the superintendent of Seminole County Public Schools, and I would like to welcome you to tonight's event, Addressing Cyberbullying and Unwise Social Media Use. Before we get started, I want to take a moment just to thank our school board members, and Ms. Sanchez is here representing our board tonight. We are very fortunate in Seminole County to have a board that really is taking the lead on student safety and mental health, and that needs resources. And we are thankful that they are invested in making sure that our campuses are safe and that we can provide resources to our students. Tonight's event is a continuation of a discussion that we started at the end of last year. And we went around the county, we had 14 different meetings with all of our stakeholders, our administrators, our teachers, our parents, our community members, about those things that we can do to make our campuses safer. And we generated a number of ideas as to how to make that happen. And one of the things that we talked about was social media and the kind of the rise of what we were seeing and some of the actions of our students, both on our campuses and at home, but having an effect on the campus. And that we needed to have a conversation with our parents so that our parents can be educated on some of those things as well. So all of us learning together is what tonight is about. So we also talked about a number of enhancements that we could make on our campuses this year, which we've done. You'll see that throughout when you go on our campuses that more mental health personnel are on our campuses. We have additional psychologists, we have additional mental health professionals, we have additional security guards, because out of that conversation, we wanted to make sure that the personnel that is needed to help address some of those issues are being pushed out and available to both our students and our parents. There were a number of procedures that changed for large-scale events like homecoming dances, and then exit and entry points at several schools that were also addressed because of some of the conversations that we had last year. And another thing that we continue to talk about is our relationship with the Seminole County Sheriff's Office, because they lead our safety and security efforts. We are, in Seminole County, probably we were the first district to have the Sheriff's Office personnel be embedded in the school district as part of our safety team. So, Captain Thornberry, who's standing off to the side here, and Sergeant Worthington are in the district office. Captain Thornberry sits as part of my cabinet so that we are making sure that we're collaborating on how best to expend resources and to make sure we're working together so that our campuses are safe. So I'm going to ask Captain Thornberry and Sergeant Worthington to come and talk a little bit about the threats overall and how we address those, because social media threats are one of those things that, again, we talked about last year, that we are seeing an increase on our campuses that are impacting our students that we're going to be talking about tonight. So please welcome Captain Thornberry and Sergeant Worthington.
Good evening. We're responsible for the 69 schools in Seminole County. That's 64 public schools and 5 charter schools. We have over 91 law enforcement officers in the school. Every elementary school has one school resource officer, one school resource deputy in it. Every middle school has one, some have 2, and then we also have 2 in every high school other than Seminole High School, where we have 3 because it is one of the largest high schools in the state of Florida. We had a great presentation last night in Winter Springs. I hope you guys listened. We're just going to talk a few minutes about the threats that we receive we want to make sure you guys feel comfortable when we do receive these social media threats, verbal threats, written threats in school, sometimes daily, sometimes a month. And right now we were talking about it, this is usually after the Christmas break, usually we start getting those social media threats and increase. And it starts dropping down just before school gets out. But I want to make sure that you guys understand that no matter how big the threat is, we work those 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And we do have a plethora of resources that we utilize, so we take these very seriously. As Kyle will speak, he'll show you some numbers up there. But once we try to vet all this information, I know we had a question last night about communication. Sometimes when you see that, or that threat over social media, or your son or daughter shows you, look at this, you're debating, should I send my kid to school? So, and you want to get that information as soon as possible. You want to know what's being done, how is it being handled, and is it safe to send my kids to school? So we're going to make that decision, and as soon as we get that information vetted, we are going to have the district, and we work together, the superintendent, the public information officer, the school principal's administration, we work together on that, and we send out a message so you guys will understand it is safe to send your kids to school. So I'm going to let Sergeant Worthington explain. Sergeant Worthington is over our threat assessment, and we'll discuss the threat assessments. But he looks at every single one at every single school to make sure, one, that law enforcement is doing what they're supposed to be doing, and also that the school is doing what they're supposed to be doing, and the proper follow-up and resources that we can provide to these kids and to these families. Because the first thing we want to find out is, why is this kid doing what they're doing? And hopefully you kids out here will see, you'll get a lot out of this presentation, but some of these, I call stupid things that are put on social media, you might think it's stupid, but we take it seriously. And there have been some kids in the past that have been charged with felonies because of the information that they have put out there that has caused havoc or scare, to where we had one school where almost 700 kids did not show up. So that means that's 700 kids and hopefully 1,400 parents that were scared enough not to send their kids to school. So we want to make sure we're handling that for you. So here's Sergeant.
Hey, good evening, folks. First off, I want to thank you for being here. I know that your parents, your guardians, I see obviously some administration officials, and then I see some school principals and staff here. So really appreciate you being out here tonight and want to learn more about social media and what you can do. So like Captain already said, he already kind of introduced me. Threat assessment program, that word or that process might seem kind of ominous, but what it is it's a deep dive into what is going on with that particular student. So when we talk about threat assessments, it's usually generated from either concerning behavior, it could be something that was said, it could be something that was written, something that's basically alarmed or concerned somebody to say, hey, maybe we need to take a deeper dive into what's going on. So really when we say threat assessment process, it's really just a deep dive into, why is the student doing what they're doing or saying what they're saying, and then what can we do to follow up with the student to make sure they have the help and the resources and that follow-up with them to make sure they have everything they need. So really, three basic principles when it comes to threat assessment is identification. So you guys are the identification. I know the captain alluded to it earlier. We have seen threats over social media. We've seen them electronically communicated over email, over text messages. And that's the first part of threat assessment, is really identifying, what's going on. So there'd be family, friends, maybe teachers, concerning behavior, something like that has spurred them to be a little bit more concerned about what's going on. And then, of course, once that concerning behavior, once that information receives to the school-based team, because in the state of Florida, it's a statewide program. So every district has a threat assessment program. Every school has a school-based threat assessment team. And this team is comprised, it's a multidisciplinary team. So you have school officials, you have principal, you have admin folks on there. You have teaching, people with teaching backgrounds on there. You have law enforcement, you have mental health counselors that are part of and that sit at a table and basically discuss what is going on with this particular student. They discuss the content, the context of everything, and try to figure out what's the most appropriate thing that we need to do for the student to support them. So that's where the assessment comes into play. So again, they sit down, they talk about the student. And then they don't just stop there, they move on to the intervention, they move on to the follow-up piece, which is probably the most important part. Are we following up with the student? Are we providing them support and everything that we need? And of course, we've seen some better impact with more mental health resources this year, so we're very appreciative of our mental health partners in this process. So I want to kind of show you some numbers here from the district, or actually, let's go back one slide, sorry. So the captain alluded to, if we go back one slide, the captain alluded to essentially what the process is. So what the process is, we have a team of detectives here at the Sheriff's Office that's all they do. They're specifically trained to deal with school-related threats. So anytime there's a threat and it mentions a weapon, then that's when they get involved. So it doesn't matter if it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, or 3 o'clock in the morning. Typically, if it involves a weapon, they will be doing a home visit. And again, these are plainclothes detectives. They're used to dealing with this information, and they will certainly handle the situation appropriately. And they continually deal with these types of cases all the time. So, and if there's no threat of a weapon, then it goes to the school-based team, and the school-based team has all the resources pretty much to handle everything you need. So, looking at the numbers here for this year, I think we're trending just north of 205 threat assessments this year. So we're about on average on where we're at usually in a typical year. And of course, the COVID year you see is the very low numbers where the kids are out of school. And typically, what we traditionally see is that during those months, or the kids are in school, we have low numbers. And then traditionally, we see when kids come back to school have very high numbers of reporting. So if I was to ask you don't have to answer, but ask you, like, where do you think most of the threats occur, right? You probably have some preconceived notion in your mind. Well, let's go to the next slide, and I'll show you actually where they come from. So actually, the majority of the threats that we deal with are actually from middle school. So I don't know what kind of notion or any answer you had in your mind, but that's pretty much where they come from. And the second one is actually elementary school. We do see an uptick usually in like 4th grade with threat assessments, and then actually our lowest one is high school. So typically by 10th grade, 11th grade, 12th grade, we see those numbers go down. So that's what the statistics show. But I want to kind of show you where these threats are made, right? So here's a breakdown of last year when we talk about school threats and where they come from. This is the breakdown basically by grade, elementary, middle, and high school. And the way we kind of classify our threats is we classify what's called transient, which basically means not serious or not something that we need to do a whole lot of follow-up on. And then we also classify them in substantive. So what that means is something more serious that we need to follow up on. But based on what you see up here, you can see that a very low percentage of those ones are actually serious threats that need maybe some more follow-up with it. So continue on. And this is a breakdown of how we receive the threats. And something I want you to kind of pay attention to is up at the screen here, you see that last year we had about 4% that were social media related. Well, as we look at this year's numbers, we actually see they're more of a 10%. So we see a 6% increase in just the threats via social media. And then if I was to add the electronic threats or maybe the threats made by text message, a threat involving some kind of device is actually on the rise. So I just wanted to kind of highlight some things for you. And again, if you have any questions for us, we will definitely be around here to answer anything you got, so we certainly appreciate that.
Thank you, Captain and Sergeant. Is this one? Are you? Okay, there we go. Thank you, Captain. Thank you, Sergeant. And I just want to say that I can attest that they are working these cases 24/7, because on Friday nights and unfortunately Saturday nights are some of the busiest nights for me to be updated on where these investigations are. And they are working overtime to make sure that you're getting the information and that schools are safe. So thank you. I want to talk about that our leadership teams throughout the district, even as early as elementary, it's mentioned that the offline, not at school, offline use of technology and social media is something that we need to talk about. And parents told us that as well. And so that's why we are here tonight, and we have an expert to come and talk with us about safe social media usage. His name is Dr. Sameer Hinduja. He is a proud Seminole County Public School graduate. And he has been spending this year going to every middle school in Seminole County and having one-on-one time with our students at every level. And he will be back to continue to work with our middle school students so that they are learning how to safely use social media. And tonight he's here to talk to us and to teach us a little bit more. He is currently serving as the professor at Florida Atlantic University in the School of Criminology and Criminal Justice. He also serves as the co-director of Cyberbullying Research Center and as faculty associate at the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society at Harvard University. Dr. Hinduja will give us a presentation this evening, and he will then answer any questions that you might have. There's a QR code on the little leaflet that was handed to you. So as we're going through the presentation, if you have any questions, go ahead and fill that out, and we will be able to answer the questions at the end of the presentation. So Dr. Hinduja, please come on up. Welcome.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. This is a topic that, of course, is a priority in so many families, and we're all trying to make progress in terms of leveling up, in terms of serving our sons and daughters, because it's challenging and it seems like things are always changing. What I'd say to you at the onset is that I live and breathe this sort of stuff, and so I care deeply about Seminole County, and I would want to come through for anyone who reaches out to me. We only have a limited amount of time together, and so I might not cover in detail everything that you'd like me to, but I hope that you reach out and ask me for follow-up materials, whether it's these slides or whether it's specific movies that you could use as teachable tools or short-form video clips or curriculum or anything like that. I might not know the answer, but I'll put you in touch with someone who might have the resource so you don't have to spin your wheels looking across Google for what you might need. So my hope for our time together is to share with you a little bit about the research, because I think that sets a really good backdrop for some of these phenomena, and then quickly get into prevention and response, because that's why you're here. Not interested in wasting your time, not interested in telling you things you could just find on Wikipedia. The goal is to make sure that you leave here with actionable strategies you can implement, plus again a resource. You have a friend in me as we move forward. So let's get started. Before we talk about some of the negatives, I think it's important to spend a little bit of time talking about the positives, because it's easy to demonize social media and technology, but there are a lot of good things there. I think about TED Talks. This is 7-year-old Molly Wright, who with her little sibling decided to give a TED Talk specifically focused on how kids and parents can work together to build thriving environments at home. And I thought that was really neat, and check it out when you get a chance, but there have been so many TED Talks, and me and probably you as well have perhaps checked out a few of them to learn about leadership, or to be inspired by this individual, or to hear this perspective. Our students are doing the same thing, and I think that's great. And it wouldn't be able to have that reach if it wasn't for these TED conferences and if it wasn't for technology and YouTube. I think about how there's also this movement where more and more youth are discussing issues that were in the past stigmatized, but now thankfully we're bringing them out into the open, and we're saying that, you know what, we're all fighting a hard battle, we're all struggling on some level, and that's okay. Vulnerabilities bring us together, and hopefully they breed more and more empathy. And so I'm hoping that more and more teens feel comfortable to do this, much like more and more teens are picking some social justice issue that they care deeply about and using their vast skill sets with video editing and graphics design and blogging and so much more in order to carry the torch and to spread powerful messages. We want that because they're change makers. They can make a huge difference, and I hope that they always feel empowered. Another girl just talking again about mental health issues and what she's going through, and another person talking about trauma in a way that many youth are able to connect with and where it resonates. And that's what we want. We want youth to learn from other youth. We want youth to feel that, wow, I'm not alone, and oh, that makes so much sense. And now I have a paradigm or a frame with which to interpret what I'm dealing with instead of feeling so alone. None of that would have been possible had it not been for social media and technology. We also see various tools that youth and adults use, and I think they're great. I think it's great when you can maybe reach out to an app and text with a trained counselor, even if you're uncomfortable going to someone at school, such as a counselor there on campus, or even chatting with your stepdad or mom or something like that. These tools are so necessary, and I think that they are saving lives. And then when it comes to various technologies, again, we know that Congress has called platforms to the mat about transparency and security and privacy and safety, and maybe some areas where we think that they've fallen short, and I think that there is some truth to that. But they're constantly working on their technology, and this example relates to live streaming, where they're able to identify in live streams, so content that is ongoing right then and there, anything that betrays suicidal tendencies, anything that might signal that there might be a shooting or something imminent. And then they can, of course, liaison with local law enforcement and deal with the issue. So the technology will get better and better. I wish it would move a lot faster, but we just have to be patient, and again, hopefully it will continue to improve the lives of those around us. So cyberbullying, I don't need to belabor this. If I asked you just over coffee, what is cyberbullying, each of you would have a different sort of conceptualization, but of course they would align in the big areas. Typically it's being a jerk using technology, whether it's your gaming console, whether it's your phone, whether it's in a group chat. I mean, it occurs in a vast array of environments and using a vast array of technologies. And there's always that overlap, it seems. The aggressors tend to be peers, so someone that the target knows from school. It isn't about stranger danger. And so we're not dealing with some sort of faceless, amorphous entity out there trying to identify who they are. And again, it is tricky for schools sometimes with some of these accounts that are being created, hate accounts that are labeled with the name of the school and targeting specific students. It's like, who's behind this? Who's behind this? But investigations do help, and we're trying to make sure that we always are proactive about these sorts of matters. And then I think about platforms. I trust that most, if not all, of the youth here will recognize every single one of these icons. But if you're an adult, don't feel bad if you don't recognize some of them. It's not a big deal. I don't want you to be exhausting yourself, feeling so overwhelmed that you have to keep tabs on fundamentally how each of these apps and gaming platforms work. I wouldn't stress out about that. I would continue to spend your time doing what you've always been doing, which is trying to raise a decent human being in your household. The vast majority of youth on any of these platforms, the vast majority, are doing the right thing. They're being responsible and they're being relatively respectful. For sure, you're always going to have a small proportion which misuses any technology that comes down the pike, but hopefully we can marshal peer pressure and induce youth to just come on board with everybody else who is doing the right thing. Because when I go online or you go online to chat with your friends or get caught up with what's going on in their lives or play a game, you just want to have a good experience, and then when you're done, you go do something else. You don't want to be dealing with trolls or people who rage quit and ruin the experience for you. So thankfully, again, the vast majority of students are doing the right thing. A couple other data points I want to share with you, if you don't mind, just things to have on your radar. So we talked about cyberbullying. This relates to what's called digital dating abuse. Digital dating abuse. Sounds very dramatic, but all we're talking about how is, how there's a ton of pressure in middle school and in high school to be involved in romantic relationships. And I don't know if this is a little bit offensive, but I'll just be honest. Youth don't really know what they're doing with their first loves and their first crushes, and they're figuring out as they go. And I was the same way, and so were all of you for the most part, in terms of maturity and being able to kind of bracket our insecurities and feelings of envy and jealousy so they didn't jack up the relationship that we were trying to build. But it's tricky. And in relationships, we're seeing power and control and abuse and passive aggressiveness, and it's fundamentally problematic. And unfortunately, it's tied to other issues down the road. So please have it on your radar. And I think that our youth just don't have great examples of healthy models around them related to to relationships, and I think that they might be getting their input and their models from reality TV or celebrity culture, which that's not the source that we want them to be focusing on. So when you think about digital dating abuse, a couple stats for you, and this is based on national data that we've collected. So think about your average or typical middle or high schooler in the US. About 14%, so not the majority, 14%, 1 out of 7 or so have been victimized offline when it comes to dating violence. 1 out of 10 have been victimized online. But here's the kicker, 4 out of 5 of those victimized online were then victimized offline. So maybe I'm dating you and I'm always going through your phone to make sure you're not talking to another guy. Or I'm asking for your password. Or I'm physically keeping your phone with me so that you give me 100% of your attention. That is very controlling and very wrong. And maybe the next day, I push you into a wall. Again, that's dramatic, but I'm trying to make a point here. There is a link. And said another way, 63% of those who were victimized offline were also victimized online. So again, just have it on your radar. Please have those conversations. Your kids, maybe earlier than you think, likely earlier than you think, want to be involved in romantic relationships. And then sexting, just briefly. I want to cover it and just share with you the data that we've collected as it relates to youth in America. About 1 out of 4 have received a nude. So 3 out of 4 haven't. 14% have sent a nude. 1 out of 4 have been asked for a nude. And about 1 out of 10 have asked somebody else for a nude. What I would say related to these stats, they've been holding pretty steady for the last decade or so based on the data we've collected. I'm not seeing it spiral out of control. I'm not characterizing it as some sort of epidemic. No, but again, we have a small proportion which for whatever reason, whether it's they have this invincibility complex where it's never going to bite them in the butt, or they're just so in love and they trust this person implicitly that they would never ever hurt them, even if they broke up, or they're a little bit loose when it comes to Internet Safety 101 and they don't have a lock code and people could access their phone or they share their lock code and then others get into their camera roll and airdrop those photos to their own device and then they just get to third parties. And so that leads to issues such as sextortion, which again is another dramatic word. I'm not here to freak you out, just sharing with you some of these terms in the academic literature that we've written on. And so what we see in this situation, it's about 5% of youth across America, and that's middle schoolers and high schoolers, have been sextorted. What do I mean by that? I mean that nude image has gotten into the hands of someone who cannot be trusted and who messages you out of the blue and attempts to blackmail you, extort you for money or additional sexual content or sexual activity. And says that if you don't give me that, I'm going to release these pictures out across the web, or to your parents who will never ever trust you again, or to law enforcement. Technically, you're a minor, it's child pornography. We'll see what they do. If it's a slap on the wrist or if it's something more serious, such as being registered on a sex offender registry. So, there's a lot of fear. There's a lot of youth who, unfortunately, they give that aggressor what they want. Again, 1 out of 20 in America, 1 out of 20 youth, 5% of youth, have dealt with this. And every week, our research center gets multiple help requests, not just one, but multiple help requests from youth in America who have fallen prey to this. It's like, come on, I wish that you wouldn't have taken that picture in the first place or that video. But I also want to understand and ideally be gracious to all students. Because maybe when I was growing up, if this was a thing, I don't put it past me to make a mistake. It doesn't mean that it's acceptable, but we want to be gracious with our youth instead of condemning them and shaming them, because then they shut down and they don't trust us and don't want to work with us when they've made a mistake. We've all made mistakes when we're adolescents. And this is just an example on Snap, which just involved an extortion case, and I had to help this individual by working with the platform. We'll talk more about working with platforms a little bit later in this presentation. So hopefully these data points again have helped give you that reference point as we move quickly into prevention and response. Because again, that's what we're here for. The first thing I'll say, it sounds very basic, but it's so critical. It's all about communication. And this is tricky, right? Because some of us haven't grown up with the technology, or maybe, some parents, they were on MySpace or, Facebook and so forth in the early 2000s. But the thing is that we just don't have the margin to constantly be learning and leveling up about all of these platforms. Maybe some of you are on TikTok, but how many of you have spent time on Discord or Twitch or, even spend time sitting down with your kid as they're working through Roblox or playing Minecraft or Fortnite. We don't have a lot of margin, and we're tired. There's so many responsibilities on our plate. But I just want more and more of these conversations. And I know you might hesitate because you don't want to sound like a moron or use the wrong technological jargon, but just try. Just take a stab at it. Maybe you could go to Starbucks and both of you could get your favorite beverage and sit down together and just chat, very pro-socially in a non-judgmental manner, just to understand what your child loves, what your teen loves. Because we know part of parenting is demonstrating interest, hopefully genuine interest, in what they care about, even if it doesn't even make sense to you, even if you're like, I don't get this, like, I want to like this, but it's just so boring to me, or I don't get the fascination. But we love our kids, so we do it anyways, and we press in, and maybe over time, we start to appreciate it, genuinely, because that's what they want too. So have those conversations, and hopefully they can teach you. And just again, 15 minutes, don't prolong it, don't drag it out, don't hammer them with heavy-handed questions, just a quick chat, and over time, you build that open line of communication. Start early. We know that middle school, they're so proficient by that age. And I have a couple little ones, and they surprise me every day with what they've discovered on their tablets. Plus, we have to watch our own words. You and I are capable of being a jerk. Life is hard, we get cranky, we get irritable. Plus, we see it sometimes. Reality TV, a movie we're watching, do we just let it go, or do we pause and have a conversation about how that was beyond the pale, that crossed the line, and you could see that other person sort of grimaced, or their body language shifted, and they were harmed by those words. We don't mess around with those words. We're better than that. We focus on mature decision making, and as we do, we live an awesome life, and we get more privileges, and we get more freedoms, and that's what you want as a teenager anyways. So call it out when others are mean, and call it out when you're mean. Like, again, when I mess up, I try to make an example of it, where it's like, son, daughter, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have been curt, I shouldn't have been short, I shouldn't have been so impatient with that cashier at Publix, because they need grace like I need grace in some areas of my life. Just call it out, and your child will remember. Otherwise, they're always looking for ways to rationalize wrongful choices or questionable behavior, even if we've been all about the golden rule for so many years. And then family standards. I trust that you've taken the time to flesh out what your family standards are. These are mine. My partner Rachel and I, we spent time just thinking through what we wanted to sort of immortalize in this permanent fashion with this sign, which is now hanging above our couch in the family room, which is where we basically spend most of our time, because that's where the TV is and where the kids love to dance when we have concerts or whatever. So I just think that with this intentionality, it gives you the opportunity to always point to some of these foundational values that you've built your home upon. And I'll be honest with you, my kids are young. I have not pointed to all of these, but I have pointed to honesty, I have pointed to humility, and I pointed to courage as it relates to their lived experience, as it relates to that interaction that happened a couple of hours ago with your best friend, etc. What happened at school. So it can always bring you back to family standards, I think is so key. I don't think that high school is too late, because every day is a new day, where we start fresh and we believe for the best. Even if the last day or week or month or year was awful. We start anew. And then thinking about conversations with our kids, one of the resources that we have on our website, which we'll also get through the parent portal, is a document called Questions Parents Should Ask. And it covers a variety of them. It starts pretty innocuous, pretty vanilla, but then over time, as I mentioned, you build that relationship and you start to ask more of the difficult questions. Again, not doing so in a way where you're squinty-eyed and pointing, but in a way where you believe the best about your child or your teenager. You believe that they have good heads on their shoulders, where they are practicing some safety practices in terms of using mute or block or report, unfriending, unfollowing. They are doing certain things. Of course, we can provide suggestions and more advice, but let's give them the benefit of the doubt, and let's just continue to support them, instead of conveying, whether it's through our words or our tone or through our body language, that they're clueless and we have all the right things to say here. Work together. There's been some really good research out of the University of Pennsylvania. Researchers such as Martin Sigelman, Albert Ellis, and they've identified that when we're working with our children, of course we want to commend good behaviors, positive choices, but we want to, of course, express disapproval when they make mistakes. And that makes sense, but the research shows that there's a specific way to do this. So I just wanted to share it with you and then apply it to some of these online issues. First off, there was this one study done involving 50 different countries, and they asked parents and guardians across those 50 different countries, what are the dominant traits or characteristics you're trying to instill in your kids as you're raising them up in your household? And way up there on the list was, we want them to be successful. We want them to be high achievers. Now, that makes sense to me. I mean, I want to raise children who are high achievers and successful as well. But what was really interesting about the research was that across every one of those 50 countries, above success and achievement was, we want them to be kind. We want them to be compassionate and caring. Now this would make sense, of course, because you would hope that that's the priority for every parent and guardian and caregiver, but it was really neat to see that borne out in the research. So then there was a number of studies done because they're trying to get to the bottom of, is it nature or is it nurture? And what they figured out was that the tendency or propensity to be kind and caring and compassionate is about 25 to 50% due to nature. It's actually genetic, it's actually inherited. But what that also means is that 50 to 75% is due to nurture, which means it's on my shoulders as an educator and as a parent, your shoulders as parents and guardians. And maybe you're like, oh crap, another thing on my shoulders. But maybe you're like, all right, well this is good because I can have a say, I can have some agency in how my children turn out when it comes to being, again, really good human beings. So when our kids do the right things, again, the research has shown there's a specific way to handle this. First off, we want to make sure that as we commend them, it is rooted in praise and not reward. I've been guilty of this in the past. Back in the day, I work with elementary schoolers every weekend, but years ago, what I would do when we would have a guest speaker is say something like, okay kids, if you would just be quiet for 20 minutes and pay attention to this guest speaker, I promise to give you candy afterwards. And then I thought to myself, after I read this research, I can't be doing that anymore, because they're only doing it because I'm holding out a carrot. I want them to do the right thing because they should be respectful and not a jerk to our guest speaker. They should be kind and sensitive and caring about that other person, how they might feel and what they're trying to do and how they're trying to be a help or a blessing or however you want to phrase it. And so from that point, again, we're trying to root things in praise. Secondly, we want to make sure that we focus on our child's identity when we're commending them. So let me explain it to you this way. I was giving this example to the group of parents and guardians yesterday, and let's say that I'm in the kitchen and we're making dinner with my whole family. So we're making chicken stew, I'm on one cutting board and I'm trimming the fat off of the chicken breasts. And Rachel's over here and she's working with the bouillon cubes, maybe the Instapot, and she's just coming up with some sort of broth. And then my little girl Maya, she's over here on the other cutting board, and she's dicing up the celery and the softened carrots, just some vegetables to add to our stew. What I could say is, wow, Maya, thank you for being really helpful. That's fine. Yeah, Maya, thank you for being really helpful. But what I should do, according to the research, is tie it into her identity and say something to the effect of, Maya, you're such a great helper. Whenever me or your mom needs something, you just sort of swoop right in. I love it. The world needs more helpers just like you. And so what you've done there is you've labeled her in a positive way. We're super careful not to negatively label our children or teenagers because then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. But positive labeling and positive reinforcement is a really wonderful thing. So as you label your teen or your child a great helper or a great listener or a great encourager, then down the road as opportunities present themselves, they will remember that, wow, I was affirmed, I was validated, I received attention and affection because of me rising up and fulfilling this role in the past, and they'll do it again. And then over time, it'll become part and parcel of who they are. Good qualities, that's what we want, right? It's about being intentional as we're raising our children. So then our children mess up. They do the wrong thing, we have to come down hard on them sometimes. But when we do, we've got to do this in a wise manner. You may have heard the distinction, but when we're coming down hard on our kids, it can go in a couple of directions. One is the direction of guilt, and the other is the direction of shame. And guilt is where your child thinks to themselves, I did a bad thing. Shame is where your child thinks to themselves, I'm a bad person. And we don't ever want our children to internalize that message, because all of us are capable and all of us have made plenty of mistakes. Plus, the research is clear. When we cultivate guilt, they become amenders or problem solvers, because we're cultivating guilt in an environment of unconditional love, full support, where it's like, okay, you messed up, but I'm in your corner, I believe in you. We all mess up, but we gotta make things right, because that was a big deal what you did. But when you cultivate shame, unfortunately, the person shamed either runs away from their problems, they become avoiders, or they lash out at the person, such as the parent, who shamed them. So, for these reasons, we have to always be intentional about cultivating guilt and doing so in that loving environment, in context, with our words, with our tone, with our body language. So convey the behavior is wrong, and you might say to yourself, we've covered this a million times in the past. But if you recall, when we're teenagers, every new instance has a different color or context, and we're able to rationalize it for this reason or for that reason. So eventually, though, you live enough moments and experiences where your decision filter is refined enough where it's like, okay, I finally get it. This is wrong for the same root reasons. So convey that to them. And then get them to understand that their behaviors do not occur in a vacuum. I remember telling my mom, I don't understand how my choices affect your life. This is my life. Let me live it however I want. But then when you get older, you realize how naive and foolish such a statement actually is. Because it absolutely does affect how I will be treated by the school administrators and by others, by friends, how I will be viewed by the parents of my friends, the opportunities that are going to come my way, how the school and other parents are going to think about my family, how my younger siblings are going to be treated as they come through the schooling system. So there's just a ton of ramifications and implications. So your behaviors do not occur in a vacuum. And then finally, we want them to be amenders. We want them to be problem solvers. So let's say my boy, he messes up on Snapchat, someone takes a screenshot, now he's busted. I could be really mad at him, and I could propose a solution, such as, I need you to write a letter of apology to that other kid who you humiliated online. I think that's a reasonable solution, but what I think is more valuable is to say something like, okay, Ravi, how are you going to make things right? You messed up, and obviously if you were in the same situation, that person did something to you that you were super sensitive about, you would feel awful and humiliated. What would you want them to do for you? How can we restore equilibrium in this situation? The point here is we want them to have practice restoring relationships after conflict, because we know that life is full of it, and if they never have that practice in the safe, supportive environment of our home, they will struggle in college with their roommates or with their teachers, and also, of course, in adulthood with coworkers and with in-laws and all the other points of contention or sources of contention that we have in our lives. I also want to talk about resilience for just a couple of minutes. Resilience is a very important topic to me. When I think about resilience, I think about a rubber ducky in a bathtub, and when you push that rubber ducky in the bathtub full of water, under the water, what happens? It pops back up to the surface. And on some level, we want our youth to be like that. We want our youth to be resilient in some capacity, especially because if you pause and think about it, most forms of mistreatment, not all, most forms though, tend to be mild, tend to be minor. And I'm talking about name calling, online, offline, insults, rumors, gossip, exclusion, rejection. I'm not saying they're not painful. I'm not saying that all kids have the same sensitivity level, where it doesn't affect some kids, but it wrecks other kids. I recognize that. But we also understand that as our youth get older, that they're going to deal with rejection and exclusion and name-calling and insults and rumors and gossip, because you and I face that in the workforce. It's a reality, and we don't want to ill-prepare them for adulthood because we spend so much time swooping in and rescuing them. And I get it, because that's my default. I love them to pieces. Sometimes when I just stare at them when they're in bed sleeping, and that's of course after maybe a rough day, my heart just melts, and it's like, I would do anything for you, and I don't want anything in the world to hurt you even slightly. But that's also not reality. I can't raise them in a protective bubble. So I could spend a whole hour with you talking about solutions in terms of building resilience. Follow up with me if you want a number of other suggestions apart from what I'm about to share, but you'll see how it's relevant. My wife's family comes from rural Virginia, and they have a bunch of maple trees near the property. And so every February, which is coming up, they're going to go out to those maple trees and they tap them, and they bring in the maple syrup into the kitchen, and they boil it and purify it and put it into jars with ribbons and give it to loved ones. And it's a fun quality time thing to do together. Why am I bringing this up? I'm bringing it up because just like maple syrup, resilience is innate in every kid. It's not like some kids have it and some kids don't. We just have to bolster it. We just have to support it. I think that's one of our dominant roles as parents, guardians, and educators. We studied resilience, and what we found, just to summarize things big picture, because we published a paper on it, and if you would like that research, let me know. We found that youth with the lowest levels of resilience, when they were targeted, they fell apart. It deeply affected their ability to learn and feel safe at school. Those kids with the highest levels of resilience, they were able to deal with it more competently, and they were able to still focus on school and not really struggle so deeply. Because again, specifically, their level of resilience. This chart says something that's related, and what that is that those youth with the highest levels of resilience, when they were cyberbullied, they engaged in what are called pro-social responses. Pro-social responses. That's, I think, what you and I want if our kids are targeted. They believed in their agency and autonomy to do something about it. They didn't just take it like a punk. On the far right of this chart, you can see some of those strategies that they employed when they were targeted. Maybe they reported it to the school, reported it to the site, changed the screen name, called the police, deleted their account, blocked the aggressor, logged off. Whereas those kids with the lowest levels of resilience, they did nothing. They suffered silently. We don't want that to happen to our kids. We don't. Again, I can share with you this research or any of these slides. Don't hesitate to reach out. I will come through for you in any way that I can. Let me share with you a model out of the University of Pennsylvania. Again, it's called the ABC model, and it ties into resilience. Adversity, beliefs, consequences. Whenever you or I, or our children or teens, face any form of adversity, right then and there, very reflexively, they adopt certain beliefs to come to terms with it, to explain it away. And again, something crappy happens in your life, you do the exact same thing. Otherwise, you would just get stuck. You would just freeze and not know what to do. But you have to come to terms with it, and so you engage in some mental gymnastics to do so, to reconcile it. Unfortunately, though, when you're a child or teenager, many of those beliefs are unhealthy. They're just super negative and problematic, and they undermine resilient responses. And then they lead to problematic consequences. Emotional consequences, psychological consequences, and, of course, poor behavioral choices, behavioral consequences. So what we want to try to do is, again, help them reframe things. Let me try to make this practical for you. Let's say that this is my adversity. I'm a girl, and I see on Instagram that I was not invited to a sleepover. Okay, what are the beliefs I immediately adopt to try to come to terms with this? Maybe it goes like this. What the heck? They had a sleepover without me? I can't believe this. This is crushing. I thought I was part of their squad. I thought I was part of their crew, and clearly I'm not. Clearly I'm on the outside. Why wouldn't they invite me? I mean, we get together all the time. As far as I could tell, as far as I know, maybe they actually get together so much more when I'm not around, intentionally leaving me out. Maybe right now they're laughing about me, talking smack about me, making fun of me. Maybe they do this all the time. And this actually confirms what happened a couple weekends ago. What happened at school this very week. And then last month at summer camp. Oh my goodness, it's just nonstop. All of these examples that I can remember confirming that I'm going to be forever alone, that I'm a reject, that I'm a loser. You saw how quickly that just evolved in my mind. It happens, it happens in adolescence. But maybe it goes this way. Oh my goodness, they had a sleepover without me. And, I mean, that definitely hurts my heart, but maybe there's good reason. Maybe they got together after soccer practice, and we were on vacation, my family, and maybe the mom said you could have a couple other girls over for the sleepover, and if I was there, they would have probably invited me too. Plus, they're not responsible for how much fun I'm going to have in my life. I could talk to my mom right now, and we could have the most epic sleepover this very weekend. It's going to rule. So again, we want to try to lean in the direction of how can we try to interpret things a little bit more differently, in a more resilient fashion, and hopefully that allows for a healthier perspective so we don't fall apart and struggle and then make bad behavioral choices. These are my favorite books related to resilience, where the protagonist is incredibly resilient, and And I can tell you that some of these books, I still think about the storyline. Count Monte Cristo, Of Human Bondage, which is a classic in literature. And I think about the storyline and I think about how, wow, that kid overcame so much and he was pursuing these dreams just like I pursued my dreams, and it was super difficult, but he pressed through and I can push through as well. We want to inspire our kids. I don't know if your child or teen is a reader, but I can recommend specific books for them if you reach out to me with their gender and their age and their interests. You hear my favorite movies, but I think that we would agree if I say pretty much every movie, there's some sort of resilient story, aspect of the storyline, because every story is where you have a character or protagonist who wants something and has to overcome some sort of obstacle in order to get it. It's every story that you and I could ever think of, for the most part. Maybe ever. So again, the point is, when you're showing a movie or watching a movie, in the evening, it might be like, okay, the credits are rolling, please go brush your teeth, make sure you floss because we ate a lot of popcorn, and I'll see you in the morning. But then you miss an opportunity to discuss the takeaways. And so maybe you could, the next morning, on the way to school or at breakfast, when you're packing the lunches, whatever it is, have a conversation about what were the takeaways, how were you inspired, how could this be applied to your life? I think that's so key, and we know our youth already love media, so use media to your advantage. That's my dad and my sister. You might know her name is Babita, and she's an educator and counselor as well. My dad came over from India without really knowing a soul, and he just wanted a better life for his future children. And I love that because he faced a number of obstacles, but he's all about resilience. And that reminds me that my family's all about resilience, and I can rise up too. You're all about resilience, each of the adults in this room, and of course, the youth. You've faced resilience and you've overcome. And I want you to try to look for opportunities where you can share those stories. I know it's hard, I know they roll their eyes, I know they pretend that they don't care, but there's got to be some moments throughout the year where you have a captive audience, and again, without preaching, without lecturing, you can just tell them a story. And maybe down the road, they'll remember, it's in my family, it's who we are. We're the Hindujas, we are resilient, we push through, we overcome, we rise up. That's my shoulder, and I get allergy shots. I'm allergic to a lot of things. Nothing related to food, thankfully. They're environmental. I'm allergic to cats, dogs, dust mites, pollen, cockroaches, oak trees, a couple other things. But what does my allergy doctor do? Well, my allergy doctor takes small little portions of each of those allergens, each of those disease-causing pathogens, and swirls them around into a concoction, and then basically takes a syringe and injects me with it in small doses. And of course, my doctor says, you need to stay here for at least 20 minutes to make sure that you don't have an allergic reaction and your throat closes up or you pass out or die or something like that. But the point here is that it is done in the hopes that I will become more resistant to those allergens, that I'll be able to cope with them so much better, that I'll be able to, in time, overcome them fully. And that's happened for some of you as well when it comes to allergy treatment. So the takeaway is that, again, we want to swoop in and we want to rescue, but in order to grow in resilience, we can't be constantly avoiding risk. We have to engage with that risk. Of course, in small doses, and you're on the side as a parent or guardian, just like my allergy doctor is on the side to make sure things don't go completely wonky or sideways. Make sure that our child doesn't fall apart. But we're just seeing, how do they deal? How are they handling this? Maybe I could just give them a little tip here. A new strategy, a new way of thinking about this to help them. But they're almost there. That's what we want. Then empathy. Let me switch gears just for a few minutes here and just talk about how I want this to be default in every school. And I know Seminole County cares a lot about cultivating empathy in intentional ways. And we don't want it to happen just when we have a tragedy. We want it to just be resident in the school culture or the school climate, because we're building connection. We're building various elements that make up a climate that's marked by peer respect and embracing differences. We studied this and published a paper on it. I won't bore you too much with the details, except to say that what we found, again, based on national data, youth across America, students with low levels of empathy, almost 2 times as likely to bully someone at school in the last month, and over 2 times as likely to cyberbully. Said another way, those kids with high levels of empathy, man, it matters so much. They were over 2 times less likely to bully and almost 3 times less likely to cyberbully. But how are we being intentional about this? Are we just trusting it's going to come along as we show them movies like Inside Out? Maybe it does a tiny bit, but what else can we be doing? So here are some of my favorite films. Again, it's about having that follow-up conversation. And I can get back to any of you if you want to reach me and just tell me more about your kid and what they're into. Some of us remember some of these from way back in the day when we were growing up. Some of my kids have watched some of these as well. But again, the point is having that conversation about Daniel Tiger. It sounds very elementary and boring, but it's worth having. And then here are my favorite books related to empathy as well. You'll remember some of them, again, from growing up. Whether it's Ramona Beverly Cleary, whether it's Charlotte's Web. So again, reach out to me, and if your child's a reader, happy to provide you with some specific suggestions. Again, this matters. We've got to be intentional about it. I'm a big fan of Tim Tebow, and Tim Tebow does a lot of humanitarian good. One of the things that he does is organize what's called Night to Shine. Night to Shine. It's a prom, a spring formal for youth with special needs. Cool thing is that he enlists the help of youth without special needs to come and serve as waiters and ushers and fellow dance partners. And they build real relationships with those kids with special needs. Even long-standing relationships, instead of just sort of like the awkward hi or head nod in the hallways. Because through these events, they're spending hours and hours and hours together, getting to know each other, getting to care about one another. I'm sure it was awkward at first because when we meet someone new or a little bit different, it's kind of hard to push through that, and we admittedly tend to avoid that and tend to just hang out with our group or our crew from kindergarten till 12th grade. But that's kind of sad also, because what are you missing out on? And my takeaway here is I want us to be intentional about putting our children in environments or situations where their hearts can be softened, at least a little bit, for them to remember that, wow, others have it less fortunate than I do. And also, I have a lot of things in my life in terms of giftings and skills and abilities that I can use to brighten someone else's day, to make their lives a little bit better. And, we think about like kindness and being nice, like, is that cool or is that lame? Don't even think about things in that way. Just do the right thing. Just be a decent human being. It's easy. Just gotta put in a tiny bit of effort. And so I also think about how when I was growing up, I had the fortune to be able to go on mission trips. And so we would go to a lot of developing countries and emerging countries, and we would go to India. I'm Indian, so to see my relatives, my heart would not just be softened, but broken, shattered, because I would see so much sadness and poverty and pain and malnutrition and deformation, or deformity rather, that would be the word. And it just killed me. But here's the cool thing. Now that I'm an adult and now that I have resources, we've been able to do a world of good in a number of countries. And I don't think that would have happened had it not been for these intentional opportunities where I could see what life is like out there. Because it's so easy to just raise our kids in that bubble. So think again, it doesn't have to be about taking your kids on these mission trips to different countries. Think about Orlando. Think about various ways that we could serve. We could be stretched. We could think about others more than we think about ourselves based on certain experiences. And how we can play a role, how we can make a difference. So again, switching gears, let's talk about our roles at home, and then we'll move into screen time. And I appreciate you hanging in there with me as we get through these points. It's typical, I get that. So I want to be gracious, but I would say a general rule should be, if your grades go down, your tech use goes down. Same with, if you stop contributing to our family, because we're a family unit, and we need you, all hands on deck. In terms of chores, in terms of responsibilities, if you're kind of slacking off and not really coming through, your tech use is going to go down, because we need your help. And then you've heard for so many years about that whole, it's got to be in a designated location at night. And maybe this doesn't apply to a 17-year-old, or maybe even a 16-year-old who has spent their life proving that they're trustworthy. But for the younger kids, yeah, maybe. And it's primarily because, as an educator, we don't want the kids to come to school and they're so cranky and irritable and they can't focus because they're very willing to stay up till 1 or 2 in the morning, Snapchatting back and forth or FaceTiming or whatever it is. And that's relatable, isn't it? Because I stayed up until 1 or 2 in the morning talking to my best friend just because I wanted to discuss my latest crush or some drama in class or something like that. We're willing to give up sleep, but again, we might struggle the next day, and we don't want our kids to struggle, and as educators, we don't want to deal with the population of students who are it's really rough those days when you know that they didn't get any sleep. And also, maybe just a simple thing could be asking them to pay 10% of the cell phone bill every month. Not that you really need them to, but just as a periodic reminder that it's a privilege and not a right. A monthly reminder that it's a privilege and not a right. Yes, money doesn't come easily, so maybe it actually does help, but we just want them to understand that. We are giving them so much. And yes, you tell me, all your friends have it, so it's like the norm, so you shouldn't think of it that way, but again, think about the world, think about life, think about how you're super fortunate to have all of these devices at your disposal. Your VR headset, your tablets, your consoles, your subscription plans. I just want you to do the right thing, son, daughter. And briefly, I want to talk about parenting. We remember a few years ago when Gwyneth Paltrow posted this picture of her and her daughter Apple, and in the comment thread, Apple gave her a lot of grief for doing so without asking her for permission. And the takeaway for me is we should ask for permission. I know that sometimes our kids are not around or our teens are not around, and it's like, I just want to upload these and get them on Facebook so that my friends and other family in other states can see them. But I think that it just sets a good model if we ask for permission from our kids, because we would want them to ask permission from their peers before they post video content or pictures of those peers, when it's possible that those peers don't want them online. Maybe they look awkward, maybe they're uncomfortable, maybe they have some reason, but we should be respectful as a team and ask our friends, ask our classmates. Just like, again, as parents or guardians, the right thing to do is to ask our kids as well, before we post, before we share, before we live stream with them. And then it's related to what's called video voyeurism, or electronic eavesdropping. And I know that sounds very heavy, but Florida is a two-party consent state, which means that you need both parties' permission to record them. Video involves audio recording, and of course, video, and you just don't want this to be happening willy-nilly across all sorts of spaces, especially spaces where privacy is to be expected. Locker rooms, bathrooms, etc. And so just have that conversation with your child. And the argument is that law enforcement is not going to take the time to pin them against the wall related to some of these specific actions, but again, it's the right thing to do. It's the ethical thing to do. We do the right thing because it's ethical, whether or not it's legal or illegal. And this specific chart just points out that parents are engaging in a lot of risky behaviors when they drive. For example, about 80% speed, 40% text while driving, about 21% don't wear their seatbelt while driving. This is across America. And for me, I'm thinking to myself, my goodness, I could speak until I'm blue in the face about how I want my teenager to be behind the wheel. But if I'm modeling the wrong behaviors, then they're going to justify it, they're going to rationalize it, and maybe it leads to some sort of accident or injury. So that, of course, applies on the road. It also applies with our own device use. And it's tricky because we're using our device many times for super legitimate purposes. It's not like you and I are just scrolling through TikTok to entertain ourselves. We're sending money via Venmo to the babysitter. We are checking investments. We're checking the weather to know what clothes to lay out for our really young kids for the next day, because it might be super cold with a front coming in. We're doing all of these productive things. We're not just sort of blindly scrolling. But our kids don't know that, and they just assume. But we should let them know what we're doing, and we have to continue to remember that they're watching us, and they're going to use what we do as justifications. It's a tug of war at home. I totally get it, and we hear all these recommendations from the American Academy of Pediatrics about what we should be doing in our homes, where it's like, okay, between 0 and 2 years of age, no screen time. Between 2 and 5 years of age, according to these guidelines, it should be only about 1 hour of screen time, and make sure that it's primarily educational. And then from 5 years of age on, you can increase it slightly, but again, make sure that they're not just consuming, but also creating, and again, leveling up with skill sets, whether they're learning Spanish via an app or whatever it is. So many parents and guardians live with so much guilt because of these guidelines, because of all this pressure that they feel from society related to screen time. And that's a miserable way to live. And I feel that too, because I'm a parent. It's like, I gotta keep watching them and always be looking at the clock and make sure I know what they're doing. I get all that. But But what I would say, just as a fundamental rule, make sure that there's just balance in their life. You know, we hear everything in moderation. I would say that applies to screen time, but also we hope that they're well-rounded. We hope that they have other interests. And I'll also say that for certain seasons of life, maybe they're all about their devices. But hopefully, in due time, we don't want that season to last forever, in due time they move to something else, and they throw themselves into that, or the next thing. So it doesn't have to be complete balance, because again, sometimes they will just be deeply involved in one season. But if you're looking at things sort of longitudinally across time, we want it to be balanced overall. So I always think about negotiating with my children, and I recommend this to you as well, about what it'll take to earn screen time. It's easy to do when they're young, but I don't think it's impossible to do when they're older, despite the fact that you have a track record of how you're doing things in your household. Just talk it out with them. Say, kid, I don't want to make your life miserable. I've got so much on my plate. I just want to chat with you because I feel like, you know, you're overusing, and I'm concerned a little bit about like what it is doing neurologically, what it's doing in terms of attitude, mental health, well-being. I mean, it's not like all this research that's coming out is complete bunk. I mean, we're starting to see certain things that are concerning, not just neurologically, but also physiologically on some level. And of course, much more research needs to be done, and it needs to be more than just cross-sectional at one point in time. And so we'll get there. You know, we will get there. But I think that, you know, it's okay to be concerned, and it's okay to chat out what it takes to earn extended screen time. Some days are better than others. Some weekends are better than others. I remember last summer we went on vacation, and it was for a week in North Carolina, and the whole week, I kid you not, no screen time. Now, it was a cool property, and we were in an Airbnb, and there was a sort of a stream out front, and so the kids just love playing in the stream, close to the stream. But I will also say that some days we have 3-4 hours of screen time, but I don't want to feel condemned. I don't want to feel indicted, because that's how it is. You know, it's like this sometimes. We're doing our best. Each of you are super conscientious in that you're here, and you want to keep learning and keep growing in these areas. And as I mentioned, just ask yourself some basic questions. How are they doing physiologically, academically, socially? Do they have a variety of interests? And it doesn't have to be 7 things, but 3 things that they care about, that they enjoy. And then how are they learning? How are they growing in their skill set? And then I think about a judgment-free zone, because we know, without a doubt, youth are so nervous in coming to us. They're nervous in coming to the adults at school, but we're doing all that we can to induce them to give the adults at school a chance to help them, to come through for them. And that was one of my dominant messages when I was speaking to every grade level in every middle school across Seminole County. So we will keep that up with reminders. But they're nervous to come to you because they're afraid that you're going to take away their phone, or not allow them to use an app or their console, or decrease screen time, whatever it is. And so if you can maybe even remind them about this in a visible way, that you're not going to judge them. You just want to chat with them. If they ever receive an unpleasant message, or if they ever feel creeped out by a stranger online, or whatever it is, just come to me. Let's just have a conversation about it. Let's maybe work through some sort of mutually agreeable next step. I want to be an ally. I want to be an advocate in your life. Son, daughter, just give me a chance to come through for you. And you'll see that we can be reasonable, we can be rational, we can be calm. But it's going to be good, and I want this conversation to continue. One of my colleagues, Dr. Kristen Matheson, has come up with these would you rather flashcards. You've played the would you rather game, I'm sure, with your kids, or at least you've heard about it. You know, for example, would you rather burn to death in a fiery volcano or freeze to death floating on an iceberg in Antarctica? Everyone loves playing that game. Well, these are some related to digital citizenship and online civility. Here are just 6, but there's so many more in the deck, which you can find online in PDF format. I'm also happy to send it to you. What's the point? The point is broaching the topic, having a conversation or a dialogue that can naturally unfold as you just have these fun, innocent conversations about different topics, asking questions. And here are their responses. And then scenarios are also really important. Research is clear that when we work through with our kids scenarios, then they come up with an action plan of knowing what to do. Now, if you turn to your child right now and ask them, would you know what to do if you're being targeted with hate speech or cyberbullying? They'll be like, yeah, I know what to do. But if they've never thought through that action plan, what to do and what not to do, in the moment when it actually does happen to them or a friend, they freeze. They get stuck and they don't know what to do. So you ask the follow-up questions. And then they help to sort of say, all right, this is what I should do, this is who I should go to, this is what I should not do. It just sorts everything out. And I have so many scenarios on my website, which is another resource we will get to you through the parent portal. They're all updated, they're all relevant in terms of the latest apps and platforms and devices, and different forms of harm as well. We're almost done here. Screenshots. Just another reminder to please always take screenshots. And of course we know how to do so on our phone, but we should know how to do so on Kindle, which runs Android, on PlayStation through the Create button, on Xbox through the Share button or using Cortana, on your Apple Watch using the Crown and the Sleep button if you've set it up in settings, in the VR headsets such as Meta Quest. We need the screenshots, we need the screen recordings. And screen recordings also are something that I'm seeing neglected. You can set up in your control center on your Apple phones, on iOS, as well as on your Pixels, Google phones, etc., on Android, the screen recording feature, which will allow us to then not just get a frame, a screenshot, but the actual video clip on TikTok, or the live stream on Twitch, or the Instagram Reel, or the Snapchat story, or whatever it is. And that's key for the school to do the investigation, and we want you to come alongside of us and help us when it comes to investigations, but also for the platform. The platform needs that evidence, that digital evidence, for them to action whatever's going on. Banning the aggressor, deleting that hate account, pulling down that content that is deeply affecting your child or your child. So our default should always be, first and foremost, screenshot and screen recording. We need that digital evidence. When your child's a target, take a deep breath. Again, your kids will pick up on the fact that you're all panicked and wide-eyed, and they will shut down. So appear calm, make sure that they're safe, and then I mentioned about evidence and how that's such a big deal and important. And then work with the school. They're doing so much, they have in years past, because I have a long-standing relationship with them, and they will in years to come, because they understand that this is where our youth are. It's not going away, it's just going to increasingly become central to their lives. So when you work with them, though, I would just ask you to give them time. They have to do their investigation, they have to interview witnesses, they have to talk to this person via this other person in some sort of snowballing fashion to get as much information as possible. They have to make sure that they abide by FERPA in terms of federal law and privacy. They can't let you know how they discipline the aggressor because, again, that's protected information. They have to make sure that they follow chain of custody and chain of command. If we're bringing in the attorneys, if we're bringing in law enforcement, it's a public school, it's a government entity. There's red tape and bureaucracy, but again, this is a priority to them. Just give them some time. Understand the system and avoid venting on social media, because I understand that you want a response right now, you want the solution right now, but venting on social media just leads to a hubbub and more phone calls and emails, and it slows down what they're trying to do for your child. And then contact the offender's parents or guardians. Hopefully that helps. Sometimes, of course, they're dismissive. You may need to get an attorney involved, and I can chat with you about civil actions like intentional infliction of emotional distress, defamation of character. There are certain civil actions that, when threatened by an attorney, the problem magically goes away. Admittedly, I would love for the problem to go away with just a neighborly conversation between a couple of parents. Sometimes it doesn't. Work with service providers. If any of you, it takes more than 24 to 48 hours to get a hate account taken down or a humiliating video or to get some sort of response from a platform, please reach out to me. I have contacts with most of these platforms, and with the screenshot or screen recording or username or web address of the account that you send me, I'll be able to forward it on to my contact and we'll deal with it quickly. And then work with the police. Again, we've already shared with you meaningful data proving that they care deeply about this and they want to make sure that they constantly have their finger on the pulse of all of this, and of course how it relates to threats. If your child's the aggressor, we want to cultivate empathy. Many times they mess up and they don't understand that it wounds as deeply as if, maybe even more deeply, as if they were doing it face to face. Monitor usage and use software, which I'll discuss in closing, and then apply consequences. It's tricky, you're setting a limit and it's really hard to stick with them. Sometimes we need to escalate consequences, but what I was mentioning to the parent group yesterday is that when I take away my child's device, I'm punishing myself because I need them to just be quiet for an hour so I can get some things done. But we have to stick to our disciplinary implementations when we set them, because otherwise we're a pushover, and we know, we give them an inch, and we understand what they will take. It's very difficult, I get that. Parenting is the hardest thing that I've had to do, and perhaps many of you can relate. As I close, just related to software, I've evaluated a number of products. I have no professional relationships with any of these companies that put out parental monitoring software, but I just like the feature set of Circle Plus in terms of allowing you to, on a very granular level, set filters, turning off and on access to TikTok or Roblox or Snapchat or Minecraft, getting detailed reports about time spent, also maybe making it more restrictive for the younger kids, but much more wide open for the older kids, pausing the internet during dinner time. There's a number of things that you can do. And so consider checking that out at your leisure if you find that it's useful in your home. But please don't install it surreptitiously without telling your teen or your child. Let them know what's going on and let them know why you're doing it. Maybe they violated your trust once or twice or more. I also like Bark. Bark does a number of things, again, related to filtering and blocking and turning off and on certain apps. But it also helps when it comes to messages that are coming in. So sometimes your youth might betray anxiety or struggles with body image or the fact that they're being bullied. So you have to make a judgment about whether you need to be in the know about this sort of stuff. It's your call. You know your child more than I do. You know their age and where they are developmentally. But also you'll have to adjust certain sensitivity levels, because if you have those on the highest setting, your phone's always going to be blowing up with notifications. Because we know how youth talk in terms of jargon, vernacular. Sometimes they just say things and just their conversation, how it's going, and just the slang that they use. So just adjust it, and maybe you'll find that app also quite useful for you. Circle Plus and Bark. Takes a village, we've heard that, and all of us have a role to play. I think you understand that, and I'm sincerely grateful that you would take the time to spend your evening after likely a very long workday, and then have to think about dinner and some of our other responsibilities. Some of you also have platforms as coaches, mentors. I'm not sure what you do in the community, but please seize the opportunity, maybe when you're stretching, maybe at the end of a game, maybe at the end of a class or lesson. Just bring up technology and social media, and just convey that you're a trusted adult and an askable adult. You're willing to chat with them about anything if they have any questions or issues or concerns or weird things have happened to them online. And again, you don't have to have all the solutions, but just being there for them, it goes such a long way. Reach out to me if you need anything in the future. The school has my contact information, and I would want to come through for you. I think that you can tell I'm deeply passionate about this, and so once again, I appreciate your attention, and now we're going to have some really solid time for some Q&A.
Thank you, Dr. Hinduja. And again, I want to let you know that we are taping tonight, so this presentation will be in the parent portal along with all of the resources that have been mentioned and additional resources so that our parents can continue to learn about this topic. I have a couple of questions here. We'll start out with one question. Should we control the time that our teenagers use their cell phones? And what would you say is a healthy time frame?
Great question. And I think that we were all put at a disadvantage because of COVID and the pandemic and being quarantined, because our youth, of course, they love seeing their friends at school and connecting, and we remember growing up ourselves that socialization aspect of it was central to our development. And so when they were at home for almost 2 years, year and a half or so, they were of course learning via Zoom and other functionalities or capabilities, but they were also chatting at the same time. They were also video chatting at the same time. So there was a lot of that interaction going on. So their laptop became a tool not just of learning, but also of building and keeping in the loop when it comes to their friends, when it comes to their relationships. And so with that said, with that reference point, it's going to be really hard to sort of reel in the amount of time that they spend on their devices, whether it's their their laptop, where they're also maybe using iMessage to chat and text back and forth, and of course many apps as well are available on a laptop or a tablet or even the phone. And so in those situations, I would just again come back to the issue of balance. If they're using their phone a lot, then it's just a tool. There are many individuals in business or in other fields which are always on their phone as well. But they're getting things done, they're being productive, they're doing a lot of good. And so if your child or your teenager is doing well in all these other areas, then I think that it's okay.
Well, question here from a parent. Please explain how guilt relates to consequence. The negatives of shame make sense in my head. The role of guilt does not.
Okay. So when it comes to guilt, we want them to understand that what you did is fundamentally inappropriate, unacceptable, unjust, painful, wrong. But everyone makes mistakes. And I've been a jerk to other people, but over time my conscience has been sensitized to understand that I don't want to treat anyone even slightly hurtful. And I want the same to happen for you. I hope that you're feeling guilt in a way where your conscience is pricked and you are compelled to make things right. That's the goal. It isn't just about the feeling. It's about how can we resolve that feeling by making things right. And so hopefully that helps. You know, it's trying to get them to understand that yes, you should feel bad about something, but you should also know that we make mistakes and we have a chance to recover from them if we do the right thing. It doesn't mean that your name is forever ruined, your reputation is forever ruined. I think of you as a bad person, your future is now going to be going in this direction. None of that. But you should understand that what you did has deep implications for that other person, and we want you to make it right. And hopefully the guilt I'm cultivating prompts you or compels you to action.
Next question is, should parents have access to their child's passwords and location?
I say yes. And again, you're so busy, so your child needs to understand, even your teen needs to understand, that you don't have a ton of time to constantly be tracking their movements or logging in as them. You're just not going to do that, but it should serve as a deterrent element if they give you passwords, and if you're able to possibly use location sharing or location tracking, whether it's built into iOS or Android, or whether you use a third-party app like Life 360, which some of you use as well. It provides peace of mind. And our kids don't really understand that when you're a parent, you worry. You do. We try not to worry. We try to live a surrendered life, but we worry sometimes. And we need to know, and when they're a parent, they're going to feel the same sort of way. So I think, absolutely.
What do you recommend parents do to monitor their kids' online gaming and social media use? The main concern here is being contacted by strangers or predators.
When it comes to being contacted by predators, it can happen on any app. It can happen while you're playing any game, whether it's through text chat or whether it's through the headsets and the microphones and audio chat. Even video chat if they're using Discord while playing some of these other platforms. And so, number one, since it can occur on any app or game, and since you can't be with them 24/7, I think what's most important is just to make sure that they're willing to come to you if they ever receive some sort of conversation starter or communication from someone who just doesn't sit well with them, or it makes them feel a little bit creeped out or a little bit weird. Immediately we hope that they would come to you if they feel unsafe. Now if they don't feel unsafe, it's likely because they know how to block, they know how to report, they know how to leave one server and go to another server and escape this person who keeps trying to talk to them where it's unwanted. They understand unwanted behavior, and they do have a specific set of tools at their disposal to deal with it. And so, again, since you can't be with them, and since you can't be listening in to their conversations and what someone is saying to them, even if you can hear, because they're in the family room, what they're saying to other people, you want to just make sure that they know that you're available for them if anything is a little bit weird. And then in terms of monitoring software, you can try some of these for social media platforms, but it's really hard to do when it comes to the gaming platforms.
What do you think about a 9-year-old girl having an Instagram account?
What do I think about a 9-year-old girl having an Instagram account? I would say that that's too young. I would be really concerned about just the messages she's slowly but surely internalizing in terms of standards of beauty, in terms of peer pressure to receive likes and followers and comments, and what that does in terms of always needing to portray yourself in a certain light to attract that. I would worry about becoming increasingly maybe over-dependent on validation from peers instead of getting her identity from much more stable sources or anchors, such as how she's doing in school, or what her future's going to look like, or what she's passionate about. It can't be from peers and their perceptions of her. But Instagram, the way that it's set up, it leads to some of those issues pretty naturally, if there are no controls and supervisions and conversations about these concerns.
Okay, and our last question that I think we have time for is, how can you teach or develop empathy?
When I think about empathy, for me it always comes back to stretching them, to getting their hearts softened. And it could be, again, you're watching a movie together, or a TV show that you both kind of sit together and binge. Well, it's what can you draw out of that? And then how can it be applied to a person's life? I would also constantly be bringing up what they're sensitive about. For example, we all have our sensitivities. When I was growing up, and it's still the case, I'm Indian, I mentioned, and so from a very early age, I had extremely hairy arms and hairy legs. That was just something that I deeply struggled with, to the point that I would wear long sleeves and jeans or pants every day of the school year, even if it was blazing hot outside, because I was so sensitive and embarrassed and mortified about the way that my body looked. And so I would never want anyone to use that against me. I would want them to be empathetic towards me about that specific struggle that I had, whether I consider it a flaw or an imperfection or just an issue. And so everyone else has those as well. And so just having conversations about that reality, about the reality that everyone is fighting a hard battle, and showing them in concrete examples that that's true, and that we all need grace. You need grace, I need grace, patience, understanding. I think that goes a long way to build that empathy.
Thank you, Dr. Hinduja. And everyone, yes. I want to share with you that when I first contacted Dr. Hinduja, he was absolutely, I would love to come home to talk with your students, to talk with our parents, and he is doing this for us here in Seminole County because he is passionate, not just about the topic, but about our community and our kids. So we are very, very thankful.
Yeah, you're not just a parent to me, honestly. I care about your situation, I care about your family situation, and whether you have a situation next week or next month or next year, you have a friend in me, Sameer.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
I appreciate it. Dr. Hinduja will be around afterwards to answer any individual questions that you might have, as well as our assistant superintendents at every level, and our deputy superintendent. All will be here to answer any individual questions, and we'll make sure, again, that you have access to all the resources that have been discussed on our website. Well, it will come through the parent portal, but on our website. Also, there's the mental health resources, the safe gun storage resources, all available to you on our website or coming directly to you through our parent portal. So thank you for coming tonight. We want to make sure we continue to have these conversations, working together to make our campuses safe, our children safe, and make SCPS a wonderful place for them to learn. We really appreciate your coming out tonight. Thank you.